All right, folks, it is 7:47 a.m. and I know we've been having a little bit of back and forth here in the chat, but let me just talk a little bit about the assignment. I apologize that I was not clear enough on the writing section of it. I received several emails from folks who I responded to, and so I will give you till the end of the day. I'll give you till midnight to get it done. So I'll extend that right now. All right. It'll close at 11:59 p.m., so have it handed in by the end of the day today. Let me pull up the PowerPoint and we can continue talking about the interwar years. Today we're entering into section 2 of this chapter, and let me screen share here. All right. So we are now moving into this section called a worldwide depression. And some of you may be wondering to yourself, what is the Great Depression? Is that just a way of describing Mr. Knight's life? No, it's actually a historical event that happened during the late 1920s, where the stock market crashed and it created a financial crisis globally. And I'm just trying to get you guys to laugh a little bit. So the worldwide depression, an economic depression in the United States, spread throughout the world. It lasted for a full decade. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons that the Great Depression happened. So let's jump into this class today. Post-war Europe. All right, let's talk about the economic situation in Europe after World War I. One thing that you have to understand is that the cost of World War I was absolutely immense, okay? And it was, they had put the burden of the cost of the war largely on Germany to pay back, but that doesn't fix the immediate problem that most European cities at this time are bankrupt, okay? They have no money at this time. The money has all been spent on the war effort. Nations have gone into tremendous amounts of debt in order to finance the war. So the nations are already crippled with debt. Many European cities are bankrupt, and they put the blame of the war on Germany during the Paris Peace Conference. The Treaty of Versailles, you might remember, placed sole blame of the war on Germany. Democracies during this time were very unstable. And the reason that democracies were unstable, first of all, you have to understand most European nations at this time do not have a very strong democratic tradition. Okay? We've been talking about European places for a lot of the class, not the whole class, but a good portion of it. And a lot of these European nations had been absolute monarchies run by a king, an emperor, a czar for centuries. All right? And after World War I, as you guys should know by now, that was the end of a lot of those dynasties. We saw the end of the Austro-Hungarian dynasty. We saw the end of the German dynasty. We saw the end of the Russian dynasty, so on and so forth. Okay, and so after World War I, these nations are trying to implement democratic governments. But as maybe we've mentioned in class before, most European places not being familiar with democracy, democracy is such a difficult form of government because it forces you to compromise and it gives everyone a voice. So when we talk about how these European nations were trying to handle the financial situation after the war, they're coming together in these democratic legislative bodies, similar to, say, Congress or something like that. And we know how Congress goes. I mean, the United States is a nation that has a very long democratic tradition. And we know how painful it can be at times. Particularly in recent years, if you've had anything, if you've had a pulse on the governmental situation in the last, let's say, 4 to 8 years, okay, Congress can really, they bicker and they fight with one another, and the conflict that is associated with democracy means that coming up with solutions in government to the problems of the people takes a long time. One of the things that we generally here in the United States, we don't like the idea of dictatorships. We don't like the idea of kings and monarchs and those kinds of authoritarian rulers. We don't like that. We like having a representative government where power is divided among the different branches of government, just like Montesquieu suggested back in our unit on the Enlightenment. And when we talk about democracy, we just have to understand that even though democracy is in many ways a very wonderful form of government, it's not without its drawbacks. It's very slow at handling problems because of all of the conversations and conflict that have to happen before decisions get made. You need to vote, that takes time, and so on. One of the advantages to a totalitarian government is that when you have a dictator in charge, when you have a supreme leader in charge, there are no conversations, right? The thing that's nice about dictatorships, even though there's a lot of not nice things about dictatorships, there is one nice thing about that, and that is that decisions get made very, very quickly. Because pretty much the only person making decisions is the guy at the top of the government. And so people are struggling after World War I, and they're looking for fast solutions. Unfortunately, they've chosen democratic governments that are going to be unable to meet the needs of the people. And so what these dictators, you're absolutely right, Arnav. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. my statement is meant to be a little bit, I don't know, sarcastic almost. It's you need to understand, I'm not trying to advocate that quick decision making by dictators is a good thing, because you're absolutely right. The decisions will be made for his self-interest. And that's a very Plato-esque comment that you just made there. So that's a smart thing. And you're absolutely right. But the truth of the matter is that it makes decisions implemented much more quickly. And that's what people are looking for at this time, because when populations are in a state of fear, there's a famous, and I think I've mentioned him to you guys before, but I'll mention him again. There was a famous Renaissance writer by the name of Niccolo Machiavelli. And Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a piece in the 1500s about the incompetence of Italian kings. At the time, Italy was divided up into a bunch of different city-states, basically, and each of them was pretty dysfunctional. And Niccolo Machiavelli wrote this piece called The Prince, talking about how a ruler should basically, be duplicitous. What that means is two-faced. A ruler should be willing to stab people in the back when he needs to, and and a ruler should try and make known all of the good things that he does, and to keep a population in a perpetual state of fear, because when a population is in a perpetual state of fear, they are easier to manipulate and control. And so the populations at this time are in a perpetual state of fear. The whole unit here is called the years of crisis, the age of uncertainty. And whenever people are feeling on a broad social level a whole lot of fear and uncertainty about the future, about the present, they look for strong leaders to take over. Unfortunately, these democracies or democratic governments that these nations have put into place, particularly Germany's, which is known as the Weimar Republic, which we'll talk about in just a second here. The Weimar Republic is weak. It's a weak democratic system with some flaws that the fascists, in particular Adolf Hitler, are able to exploit. And so, because you have these people who start making a name for themselves by preying on the fears and uncertainty of the population. They start making promises to the people. If it wasn't for the failures of the Weimar Republic, if it wasn't for the incompetent leadership in democracy, we would have solutions to these problems. And so this fear is able to be exploited by people who are looking to, take power, take control over the government. Another thing that happens in these governments, in these democratic governments, is that you see coalition governments form. Let me explain what a coalition government is. A coalition is a group of people, okay? A group of people from different backgrounds usually. All right, and when we talk about a coalition government, what we see happen, let me pull this up for you here. I'll use paint to kind of demonstrate what I mean. So normally I would use the whiteboard for this, but in a democracy like the United States, right, it kind of looks something like this. Yeah, art class. Exactly. This is kind of how our democracy looks right here. All right? You have oh, I didn't mean to do that. you have the Republicans, you have the Democrats, and you have like a few independents, okay? It's essentially, with the exception of a minority of people, it's essentially a two-party system, right? And what this means is that either the Democratic or the Republican Party are able to secure relatively easily a majority vote, all right? And so this is essentially the breakdown. It's not exact, it's not precise, but it gives you a good enough idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, so you have basically a two-party system, and it means that either side is able to relatively easily capture a majority vote. Unfortunately, in many of these other European nations, when they start making democracies, okay, the democratic systems there are much more fragmented, okay? So instead of having only a couple of parties, right, you end up having many different parties, and it's very difficult for any one of these parties to capture a majority vote. You have all sorts of different people of all different political backgrounds, thoughts, feelings, plans for the future, and no one party is very easily able to capture the majority vote. And so what these parties have to do is they have to find other parties that are kind of similar to them. So maybe these three parties, even though they're different parties with different platforms, different ideas, they may agree on a single issue. And so what they will do is they will band together to be able to capture a majority vote against the other parties who are all going to be voting against one another. All right? So these coalition governments form, but the thing is that these two are very unstable because maybe this party here really doesn't like these two other parties, and they end up backstabbing them and then joining up with these guys over here and creating a coalition to outvote these two parties over here. So these coalitions that start to form make it so that the government is constantly in a state of transition and flux, and you really don't know what's going to happen next because any of these political parties could just backstab the other and switch sides. So that kind of gives you an idea of what these party coalitions are like. All right, so let's talk about the Weimar Republic. Now, I know it looks like Weimar Republic, but remember that W's in Germany are pronounced as V's. So Weimar Republic. This is Germany's brand new baby bird democratic government, and it's going to be taking its first flight out of the nest. Again, as I told you, Germany does not have a strong democratic tradition, so this is really the first time that they've implemented democracy on a widespread scale like this after World War I ends. But in 1919, after the Treaty of Versailles puts all of the blame on Germany for the war, the Weimar Republic is more or less forced to sign to agree to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. And this really upset the segment of the German population that had just fought in the war. All of these German soldiers are coming home defeated. They're coming home bitter and resentful. And when the Weimar Republic agrees to the Treaty of Versailles, very quickly the far-right military people in Germany, former generals, former soldiers, and other German nationalists, look at the Weimar Republic as though they just stabbed Germany in the back. And in fact, that is the nickname that the Treaty of Versailles gets in Germany, the stab in the back, that the Weimar Republic agreed to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles and accepted sole blame of World War I. So this stab in the back was immediately viewed, by these military guys, far-right nationalists and former generals and soldiers from World War I, as a betrayal. They are very, very, very bitterly resentful over the stab in the back of the Weimar Republic, this brand new democracy in Germany, accepting the terms of the Treaty of Versailles rather than fighting back against it. And but the truth of the matter is that Germany really had no choice. They had just lost the war. They're not going to start another war. What other choice did they have but to accept the terms of the Treaty of Versailles? And so all of these different political parties of all different sizes in the Weimar Republic start to form. Some of them are larger, some of them are smaller. And then over time, the party sizes change as people start swapping between parties in the broad public, right? The general population. But all these different political parties made it really, really difficult for Germany's Weimar Republic, this new democracy that they formed, to solve the problems that Germany was facing at this time. So the Weimar Republic gets blamed for the country's defeat and their humiliation. Was it really the Weimar Republic's fault that Germany lost the war? No. But it was a very easy way to manipulate this uncertain, fearful population to believe that the Weimar Republic may not have the German population's best interests at heart. So, here's kind of what Germany looked like back in those days. This is just a photograph of Germany immediately after World War I in about 1919, 1920. And one of the things that Germany has to figure out economically is how are they going to handle all of these problems surrounding being blamed for the war and having to pay for it. All right. It's going to be really, really difficult for Germany to handle the entire bill for World War I. So one of the ways that they go about doing this is through printing more money. And this is really a major, major mistake, because printing money really is not a solution to economic problems. Let me explain to you why. When we talk about money, and I think we've probably talked about this before in here, we have talked about how money, the reason people use paper currency is because you have confidence that when you take money, that you can turn around and use that money to purchase other things. The money holds its value, okay? What would happen, though, in the United States if all of a sudden the government said, people don't have enough money? What if the government just magically said, people don't have enough money, so what we're going to do is we're going to print out an extra $1 billion and spread those $1 billion evenly across the population? What would happen if they did that would that all of a sudden, because you're just flooding the marketplace with a bunch of new money, now money becomes less valuable, because money, the value of it is determined in some sense by its scarcity. Okay, so the fact that money is rare, okay, means that it retains its value over time. Now, inflation that happens slowly is okay. We don't like it, all right? We don't like inflation. We wouldn't say that inflation is a good thing necessarily, all right? But it's better than the alternative, which is deflation. Deflation is when your marketplace is losing dollars. What this would do is it would cause the value of money to go up, which you might think is a good thing. The problem with deflation, though, has more to do with because money becomes more scarce in a deflation scenario, people stop spending money and they start hoarding it. And that makes it even more scarce than it already was. Okay? Who makes the money and starts the money system? Well, boy, that's a complicated question, Arnav. Who makes the money in the United States is the Department of the Treasury. That's who prints money. But the Treasury Department. But how much money they print is dependent on a lot of different factors. Okay. Let me give you a little bit better explanation here. Okay. Let's kind of start over a little bit here. All right. Inflation happens naturally. When I was your guys' age, okay, when I was 15, I'm 37 years old, all right? When I was 15, all right, at 15 years old, I could go up to McDonald's and get a meal, okay, for probably in the area of about $5 or $6, including tax, all right? $5-6, quarter pounder cheese, fries and a Coke, $6, tax included. These days, you go to McDonald's to buy the same exact thing, quarter pounder with cheese, fries, and a Coke, and you're spending, $8, $9, $10 these days. Why is that? How come I have to spend more money now to buy the same thing? The answer is inflation. Because in the time since I was your age till now, okay, so I was 15 in about the year 2000, all right? So 2000, 2001, somewhere in there. And the answer is inflation. Over time, the economy has grown. And because the economy has grown, more dollars are now circulating around in the economy, all right? But that's a slow inflation. It's taken, 21 years for the economy to get to where it is, all right, today. It's taken 21 years for the price of a value meal to go from $6 to $8, all right? That's not too bad, okay? That's not that bad, all right? So we don't worry too much about that kind of inflation. Do we like it? No. Okay, because what that means is, let's say that you got a gift of $100,000, all right, and you put it in the bank today. When you want to, let's say you're like, I'm just not going to touch that money, all right. When you come back to that in your savings account in 50 years, you're still going to have $100,000, but that $100,000 is going to buy you less in 50 years than it will today, because over time, inflation's going to happen and stuff will start to cost more money. So over time, our money does slightly devalue. That's okay though, because we have other ways of making money in the meantime. What happens if you inflate the economy too much is the scenario that Germany got into. This becomes known as hyperinflation. All right, hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is when the government pretty much over the course of about a year or so prints so much money that the money itself becomes literally valueless. Okay? And I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean here. But they print too much money. There were no wartime taxes during World War I, so the government is bankrupt. They weren't taxing the people. And heavy reparations from the Treaty of Versailles. Reparations are the costs of war. Okay, that's what that phrase means right there. Reparations are war costs. Because Germany was made to pay all of those costs of World War I, they decide to go about paying the costs by printing even more money. Okay? And so the German mark, which is the currency that they were using at that time, Germany no longer uses the mark. They use the euro and have been using the euro for some time now. But back in those days, they didn't use the euro, they used German marks. And what happened to the German marks is that they dropped significantly in value. And I'm going to show you this picture here. This is a very famous picture from the early 1920s. Now, I don't know if you can see what she's doing there, but those are banknotes. These are German marks down here. This is all money. And in case you can't tell what she's doing here, she's taking this giant stack of money, paper money, and throwing it into her furnace so that she can use the money to heat her home. Now you might be thinking to yourself, has she gone insane? Why would she be burning all of this money? The answer is because all of that money right there would not have even purchased you a simple loaf of bread at the height of the German economic crisis in the early 1920s. Because the Germans had printed so much money nationwide that all of this money here had become worth way less than the paper that it was printed on. The money is so valueless, they can literally get more out of it by burning it, okay, than by using it to purchase other goods. All right, there's a famous story. There's a famous story of of the years right after World War I in the early 1920s in Germany, where a guy goes to a store. He brings with him a wheelbarrow full of German marks in it. He goes into he leaves the wheelbarrow outside the store. Okay, he goes inside. He says, "I have all the money I need to purchase a loaf of bread." He goes back out to get the money, and the money is laying on the ground and the wheelbarrow is gone. Because what happened was the money was so valueless, the people didn't even want the money. Normally, if you saw a wheelbarrow full of cash, okay, you would go and grab all the cash in the wheelbarrow that you could handle and run away. But because the cash was so valueless, they dumped all the cash out onto the ground and they stole the wheelbarrow because that was the only thing that had any value. So this is how valueless the money becomes in Germany. Let me give you another example. Let's take a look at the price of bread. What is the cost of bread in Germany? In 1918, the final year of the war, to buy a loaf of bread in Germany cost less than 1 mark. In 1922, just 4 years later, the cost of bread is now 160 marks. In other words, the cost of bread has gone up by 160 times in less than just 4 years. Okay? Just 1 year after that, by 1923, the Germans are printing so much money that to buy a loaf of bread with the German mark would cost 200 billion marks, which of course is an absurdly huge number that it's hard to even wrap your head around. All right? And the reason that the price of bread skyrockets to 200 billion marks is because the money is worthless. you look at this number and you think 200 billion marks, they must be so rich. No. You could have 200 billion marks and not be able to afford a loaf of bread. Okay? The amount of money is only worth what you can buy with it. Okay? So even though you could quote unquote be 100 billionaire in Germany, you would still be completely poor, unable to heat your house, unable to buy food, and so on and so forth. So what happens is bread lines start to form. You can see here a bakery, okay? And here is a police office here instructing people to get into line for bread, okay? The whole thing is the whole German economy is in a tailspin right now. It is ready to crash and burn until an American banker by the name of Charles Dawes comes up with a plan, and it gets called the Dawes Plan. Here was the plan. America, at the end of the war, was not as upset with Germany as Britain and France were. Instead, America wanted to see Germany's economy recover because in the years leading up to World War I, Germany had been a huge industrial manufacturer. Germany was industrializing, coming up with all these new inventions, had a promising future in terms of pharmaceuticals and automobiles and planes and other things like that. So the Americans, they want to see Germany recover. And they decide, Charles Dawes basically says, one way that we could help the German economy out would be to offer a loan, okay, for the American government to offer a loan to Germany for $200 million. Now, the American money at this time is very, very valuable. During the 1920s, the American economy is soaring. We have all sorts of new consumer manufactured goods, mostly electrical goods, things like radios, things like washing machines, things like dryers, things like refrigerators, and so on and so forth that start to be invented in the 1920s, and people want to buy them. So what happens is the American economy takes off, and American money is very, very valuable at this time. The idea is if America gives a loan to Germany, number one, it will help to support the German economy. Number two, it will put confidence into the German economy so that other investors will be encouraged to invest their money in Germany and change the economic situation around in Germany. So think of it almost like if Germany was walking down the road and they broke their leg. And America says, don't worry about it. I have a splint here. We'll get your leg patched up so you can keep walking down the road. All right? The American money is operating as a sort of, splint or cast to put around a broken leg. All right? And this helps the German economy start to get back on the right track thanks to the Dawes Plan. So this is put into effect in 1924. And it's successful. Charles Dawes Plan works. Okay? In just 5 years, German factory production returns to normal. Their currency starts to stabilize. The German population is starting to become more confident. They're becoming less fearful. Bread prices start to return to a more normal level. All of these things are going on that make people feel more comfortable again and less fearful about the future, because thank goodness America lent Germany all this money so that they could get themselves back on the right track. And it probably would have continued to work, to tell you the truth. It probably would have continued to work. But in 1929, something else happens. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Here's Charles Dawes, the American banker who came up with the plan to give Germany this loan and get them back on the right track economically. Also during this time, you have to understand that there's a tremendous amount of fear surrounding another war. So, what do I mean by that? Well, America, knowing that the Treaty of Versailles was flawed, had refused initially to join the League of Nations. And they do not agree to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles because American senators in Congress took a look at the terms of the Treaty of Versailles when it was finished, and they said this is going to lead to another war, and we don't agree to that. People want peace during this time. Britain, Belgium, France, Italy, Switzerland start meeting at this brand new organization known as the League of Nations. The League of Nations was meant to be this peacekeeping organization where nations could come together and use diplomacy, talking with one another, to be able to resolve their problems before causing another war. And America at first does not join the League of Nations, right? Germany also was not allowed into the League of Nations thanks to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. And so Germany also is not in the League of Nations. And then what ends up happening is that Germany signs a peace treaty with France and Belgium, agreeing never to invade them, and they get admitted. The problem is that in the League of Nations there were a number of flaws that prevented the League of Nations from being able to enforce the resolutions that these nations come up with. So let's say that, all these nations are meeting in the League of Nations, they come up with this agreement to, never invade France or Belgium. The problem was that if a nation broke that, the League of Nations had no way of coming together to prevent that from happening or punish nations that broke the rules. Think of it like if you went to wherever, you go to the mall and you just start stealing a bunch of stuff from a store, and the police show up and they say, hey, put that back. And you're like, no, I already stole it. And they're like, all right, well, just don't do it again. All right, that would never work. Okay, the police in that scenario are not enforcing the laws, which means that the laws are going to continue to be broken. All right, it's simple. It's very, very simple. And so in the League of Nations, because they have no body of enforcement, when they come up with these agreements between different nations, there's no way of ensuring that these nations are actually going to stick to their agreement and not break the rules. And the most famous example of this happened in real life. It was with Japan. There was an agreement with Japan and China that Japan wouldn't invade China. But then they do. We already know that. I already told you that Japan invades China in 1937. 1936, 1937, somewhere in there. And when they do that, the League of Nations turns to Japan and they're like, Japan, what are you doing? You're breaking the rules. And Japan's like, I know. And they're like, well, don't do that. And Japan's like, no, I think we're still going to keep doing it. So there's no way of enforcing these terms that they come up with in the League of Nations. So this is going to be very problematic, because once one nation starts breaking the rules and other nations realize that when someone breaks the rules, there's no consequence for it, other nations are also going to start breaking the rules. And that's exactly what ends up happening. Germany starts breaking the rules of the Treaty of Versailles as well. And the League of Nations has nothing that they can do to prevent that from happening. So you know, the League of Nations has no armed troops. Excuse me. My voice cracked. Let me grab a glass of water really quickly here. I'm dying of thirst. I'll be right back. Oh my gosh, this water's heavenly. Okay. So, let's talk about what happens in 1929. Remember, I had told you that the Dawes Plan by 1929 was really working really well, and people had started to think that they had turned the corner and things were going to keep getting better. But then this happens. In October of 1929, the stock market crashes. The American stock market crashes. This is bad, okay? Why does the stock market crash? Well, there's a few reasons. So let's talk about why the American stock market crashes in 1929. All right. So the first most important reason for why the stock market crashes is overproduction. I mentioned to you that in the 1920s, there were a bunch of new electronic appliances and other things that people were buying, okay? Stuff that was powered by electricity. You know, electric dryers and electric refrigerators and electric, you name it, washing machines and so on. Here's the thing about all those products. How many washing machines do you need in your house? Probably the answer to that question is one. All right. How many dryers do you need in your house? One. How many ovens do you need in your house? One. How many cars can you drive at once? One. Okay. So all these things that people were buying, you really only need one of them. Plus, they're expensive. So what happens is you buy one, and you're expecting, like, well, I just bought this expensive appliance, it better last a while, okay? So that's the other side of it, is not only do you only need one of them, you also, when you buy one, you're gonna have it for many years, okay? You could buy a dryer and have it last for 20-25 years, okay? So, but what happens is, because all of these people are quickly buying all of these brand new products on the market, companies making these products say, wow, these things are in really high demand, let's just keep on churning out tons and tons and tons of them. And for a while that worked, because there were a lot of people who wanted to buy them. But eventually, by the time that we get to 1928, 1929, the companies are not selling as many of these things anymore, but they still keep producing as many as they were before, as though they were selling them at the same rate. And so what happens is they overproduce all these goods, and every year companies are coming up with new designs, new products, and so on, and they liquidate the ones that didn't sell from the year before. But when you liquidate your warehouses, you're selling products for less than what it took to produce them. So what ends up happening over time is that these companies, they continue producing tons and tons and tons of products for people to buy, but they are not selling those products with enough of a profit to be able to continue to produce them effectively. And the market becomes flooded with cheap goods that people are not buying, all right, because they only need one dryer, one car, one refrigerator, whatever in their house, okay? So they overproduce stuff and people stop buying it, and then by the time that you get to 1929, all these companies that had been making all these different products, they have warehouses everywhere that are just filled with unsold merchandise, okay? And they can't unload it because there's no demand for it anymore because people already bought all the stuff that they need. And so warehouses are just filling up with all of these goods, all of these consumer goods, appliances and other things, and no one's buying them. So, but people weren't really aware that this was going on. You know, there were not many people who were aware that these companies were kind of making it seem like they were still doing really, really well, but in reality, they had all of this unsold stuff that had been made the past several years that they can't get rid of. And meanwhile, they just continue to keep producing as though they're still selling all of it. Not good. The other reason that the stock market crashes is basically, the simplest way that I can put it is too much debt. What do I mean by that? Well, it has a whole lot to do with what people were doing with the stock market. So let's talk about how the stock market works, okay? In order to buy stocks, okay, and this is somewhat relevant. You probably heard the story in the news recently about all that stuff with GameStop and AMC movie theaters and stuff like that. Here's how you buy stocks. First of all, if you want to buy stock in a company, the company has to be big enough and have to be a publicly traded company. You can't just buy stocks in any company that you want. There are certain restrictions to which companies you can buy stocks in. All right, so that's the first rule that you should be aware of about buying stocks. The other thing is this. When you buy stocks, there are some funny rules about buying stocks. The best way to buy stocks is to use your own personal money. Okay? Your own personal money. The reason is because you don't want to be using someone else's money to purchase stocks. Because what can happen in that scenario, let's say, okay, let me give you an example. Let's just talk about it in a real world example. Let's say you went to the bank, okay? And you take out a loan from the bank. Let's say you lie to the bank. And you say, I need a personal loan because I want to buy a car. So the bank says, okay, here's how much money you can borrow. We'll lend you $5,000, okay, at whatever interest rate, and it has to be paid back in 5 years, okay? And you take out this $5,000 of the bank's money. Okay, it's not your money, you borrowed that money. So you're now starting, okay, hear me out, you are now starting at minus $5,000 because that's not free money, right? That's money the bank lent to you that they expect you to pay back in full plus interest, okay? Let's say then that instead of, like you told the bank, you said, I need it because I want to buy a car. Let's say you say, well, I'm not actually going to buy a car. I'm going to take that $5,000 I borrowed from the bank and I'm going to put it into stocks. I'm going to buy stocks with it in a company. Let's say I like the company, whatever, Google, okay? I'll just use Google. I like Google, so I'm going to put $5,000 into Google. Plus, I think that's a good decision because Google's already a big, successful company. They're too big to fail. They're a big company that is, they've been hugely successful the last 20 years. That's a real safe bet, right? Sounds like a pretty good idea. And then over time, your Google stocks will grow. Meanwhile, you'll still have to pay the bank back every month until you pay off your original loan from them. But sounds like a really cool idea because, hey, maybe I can make some money if Google continues to grow and I'll actually make money on that $5,000 that I borrowed from the bank. Let's say in an ideal world, let's say everything goes to plan and Google grows significantly. They come out with whatever, teleportation technology. Let's say Google comes up with teleportation technology and Google stocks skyrocket. And now all of a sudden, the money that you invested into Google, that initial $5,000 that you borrowed from the bank, now it's worth $50,000. Wow. You made a really good financial decision there. But here's the thing. That's never a guarantee. All right? When you are putting your money on the stock market, you may as well be putting your money down on a blackjack table in Las Vegas because it could be gone within minutes of you putting it down, okay, on the table. So this is what ultimately ends up happening to a lot of people. All right? They end up taking out money, borrowing money that isn't theirs. They put it onto the stock market. The stock market crashes. They lose all of that money. Oh, and by the way, now not only are they broke, they still owe all of the initial money to the first person that they borrowed the money from. And that's where you get the debt from. Now, on an individual level, people were doing this, but the much more troublesome thing is that companies were doing this. Specifically, banks were doing this. So, here's what happens when you go to the bank and you put your money in the bank. When let's say you get $500 from your grandmother for your birthday or for graduation or whatever. When you take that $500 to the bank and you give it to the bank teller, they don't go back into the safe and put it into a drawer with your name on it and say, oh, this is so-and-so's money, okay, don't touch it, all right? That's not what they do with it. Banks are companies. When banks take your money, it is going into the bank's bank account, okay? And the bank then takes your money and they invest your money into the stock market. This is very, very, very scary during this time because what ends up happening is that when the stock market crashes, the bank has been taking money from people who have, if you will, been the ones lending money, quote unquote, to the bank. So now the bank is indebted to people who use the bank's services, and the banks have lost all of the money that they have taken from the people who use the bank on the stock market. So when people go to the bank when the stock market crashes to take money out of their bank accounts, the bank basically has to tell them, hey, yeah, sorry, it's gone. It's all gone. Okay? There is no money to give you. We have no money because all the money that you gave us, we invested in the stock market because we wanted to see our bank business grow, and the stock market crashed, and now all of the stocks that the bank had are worth nothing. And so when you sell them, they don't get any money from selling the stocks, and thus they don't have any money. This is very, very, very bad. And what the thing that you have to understand is today, when you put your money in the bank, the United States government insures your money up to a certain point. I think it's about $300,000 or so. So you could have up to $300,000 in your bank account, and if a bank goes bankrupt, okay, the federal government insures your money. So if the bank goes under, you don't lose the amount of money that you had in your bank account, up to $300,000 or somewhere in that area. Maybe it's about $350,000. I'm not sure the exact number anymore. That's called FDIC. When you go to a bank and they say this bank is FDIC certified, what that means is that the federal government insures your money at that bank. In case the bank was to go under, you could file a claim and get your money back, and the government would compensate you. All right, that does not exist though in 1929. There are very, very, very few safety nets for the population when the stock market crashes. And by the way, I should mention to you, depressions were relatively regular occurrences in the olden days in America. Economic depressions predictably occurred about every 18 to 20 years. Since the Great Depression, though, ended, the United States has not had an economic depression in a very long time. Okay, we are going now on, basically nearly 100 years of not having a depression. The last 100 years of American history have been some of the most prosperous years economically. They have been the most prosperous years economically in the entire history of the nation. So, we have not had an economic depression in a long time. We did have a couple scary close calls. We had the Great Recession, which is not as bad as a depression, but the Great Recession happened when you guys were little kids, right around the year 2008 or so, and that too had to do with banks, to be honest with you. Because what the banks were doing then was they were lending out a bunch of money for people to buy homes, and these people were buying these homes that they couldn't afford because the bank was lending money to anyone that they could, and they were lending it to people who they knew wouldn't be able to pay it back, and this ultimately is what ended up causing the stock market the Great Recession to happen. But anyway, this is the Great Depression. All right, we are now in the years of the Great Depression. Now, the other side effect of this relates to what we were talking about with the Dawes Plan. Okay, when the Dawes Plan got put into place, it had been working for about 5 years by 1929. However, when the stock market crashes that same year, that loan that America initially gave to Germany, it's gone. All right, the American economy crashes, and now not only is Germany's legs broken, America's legs are broken, and no one can help anyone out. Okay, the American stock market crashing results in a domino effect of everywhere else around Europe ends up suffering as well. So this is what causes the Great Depression, and banks are closing, businesses are failing, millions of Americans go bankrupt, During the 1930s, many Americans lose their homes, lose their jobs, lose their cars. They end up building these things called shanty towns, where people are living in shacks, okay, in large communities in just basically, wooden or mud hovels, all right, in these large homeless communities in urban areas and surrounding urban areas across the country. Farms and houses get repossessed by the banks because people have no money and have no jobs and thus can't pay the loans back for their farms or houses that they bought the previous decade. There was no government assistance available at this time. There were none of those safety nets that I talked to you about, like collecting unemployment checks or those kinds of things. And then, to make matters worse, the Dust Bowl happens. So in America, we go through a period of time where there are tremendous famines happening. People can't make enough food. There's this weird weather pattern that's happening in the Midwest, in places like Kansas and Oklahoma and Nebraska and so on, where farms that previously had been producing tons of corn and grain and other things like that, the farms are no longer producing enough food, all right? And so people are worried about going hungry, and unemployment skyrockets, okay? People lose their jobs. The unemployment rate hits about 25%. That means that 1 in 4 adults didn't have a job. That's really bad. Now, in modern day times, our unemployment rate probably is somewhere in the area of about, 4 or 5%, somewhere in that region. Okay, that means that that's very, very low. So that means out of 100 people, 95 of them have jobs. Okay, versus if it's 25% out of 100 people, only 75 of them have jobs. That's not good. All right. The Great Depression, this is one of the most famous photographs from the Great Depression. You can see this poor mother and the look of concern on her face. And you've got her 2 children who have their heads turned, and she's even got an infant in her arms here. And this would have been, just a tremendous hardship that people had to go through during this time. Well, let's look it up, Arnav, just because I'm curious. U.S. unemployment rate. Civilian unemployment rate. Let's see here. It's at 6.3% right now, as of January 2021, 6.3%. All right. So, effects on Europe, just to wrap this up really quickly. Germany and Austria get hit really hard by the American stock market crash because the Dawes loan that had brought stability to the German economy, the stability that had been brought to the German economy had been washed away when the American stock market crashes. And a lot of those war debts depended on American loans. Their banks begin failing. Tariffs on imports and exports begin going up. And the reason that that's bad, whenever a depression hits, countries start looking out for themselves first. And what they will do is they will raise tariffs on foreign imports so that people will buy homemade goods. So in Germany, they start raising tariffs on things, and that means that Germans are not going to buy foreign products, and this causes world trade to go down, okay, because people aren't buying foreign goods anymore because all the different nations start implementing tariffs to protect their own economies so that people will buy stuff that's made from their home country rather than buying stuff that was made in a foreign country. And by the way, just to let you know, Arnav, that didn't come from Google. It came from the U.S. Department of what was it? It came from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the United States Government Bureau of Labor Statistics. All right, is where I got that fact from, not just Google. All right, so that brings me to the end of my lecture for today, folks. I just want to say thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Make good decisions, and we'll see you again soon.